I should have been excited. Most women look forward to their 30th birthday, but as mine crept closer, I felt nothing but dread. Instead of joy, it pressed down on me like an obligation, a performance I was being forced to endure. The truth was, I hadn't felt like celebrating anything in a long time. This past year had unraveled me in ways I could hardly admit, even to myself. My marriage, once the center of my world, had become something suffocating. Richard, my husband, had a talent for control. It started small, like raindrops before a storm, until one day I woke up and realized that every decision, every choice, every corner of our lives was dictated by him. He managed the company my parents had left me. He decided who we saw, and now he even managed how I was supposed to look on my own birthday. "Don't embarrass me, Natalie," he had said earlier that week, his voice sharp but calm, like a warning wrapped in velvet. "Everyone will be there. You can't just show up in one of your ridiculous skirts and sneakers." I had always preferred comfort, long flowing skirts, simple dresses, even jeans and bright shirts when the mood struck me. That was who I was. But to Richard, that was unacceptable. He reminded me constantly that I wasn't 16 anymore, that I had to learn to present myself like the wives of his colleagues. "Do you know how humiliating it is," he sneered one evening, "to stand beside you when all my partner's wives are elegant, polished women, and you look like some careless girl who hasn't grown up?" The words sliced deeper than I wanted to admit. I would cross my arms against my chest as if I could shield myself from his contempt, but the damage lingered. Sometimes I wondered if he was right. Maybe I was stuck in the past, clinging to pieces of myself that no longer fit the woman I had become. Yet the moment that thought surfaced, I pushed it away. I knew what this really was, his way of breaking me down until I no longer recognized myself. As I wandered through the mall, weaving past mannequins dressed in glittering gowns I didn't want, I kept thinking about how far we had drifted. It was hard to remember the man he used to be, the one who once called me darling, who laughed at my silly jokes, who looked at me as though I was his entire world. Those moments seemed like fragments from another life, blurred and unreachable. Now his eyes carried only irritation, sometimes even disgust, as though I were a nuisance he had to tolerate. Tomorrow he was throwing a grand party for me. He had taken over everything, the guest list, the catering, the music. All I was expected to do was show up in the kind of dress he deemed worthy. It was supposed to be my birthday, yet it felt like a stage where he could parade his power, his wealth, his perfect life. And me? I was nothing more than a prop. If I had my way, I would have spent the day quietly with Katie, my little girl, maybe a close friend or two. We could have eaten cake at home, laughed together, and let the day pass without spectacle. But Richard had no interest in what I wanted. He had told me as much. "You need to grow up, Natalie. Stop being ridiculous. A woman of your age should know better." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about the party, about the people I didn't know who would shake my hand, smile fake smiles, and pretend to celebrate me. I felt the bitterness rise in my throat. It wasn't my celebration at all. It was his. Still, I knew I would go. I would put on whatever dress I bought, smile when I was supposed to, and play my part. Because in Richard's world, resistance wasn't allowed. And tomorrow I would once again be reminded of just how much of myself I had already lost. The mall was crowded that Saturday afternoon, its wide corridors echoing with footsteps and chatter. I drifted from one boutique to another, half-heartedly running my fingers along sequin gowns and racks of silk dresses. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt like me. But I wasn't here for me. I was here for Richard's party and Richard's standards. I was about to step into another shop when a voice stopped me in my tracks. "Darling." A familiar male tone rang out, warm in a way I hadn't heard in years. My heart lurched. Richard? For a fleeting second, hope bloomed inside me. Maybe he had come here to surprise me, to help me pick something out, maybe even to remind me that somewhere beneath all his sharp edges, the man I once loved still existed. I turned, ready to smile through tears. But the smile never came, because there he was, Richard, standing not 10 feet away. And beside him was a woman I had never seen before. She was striking, tall, slender, with golden hair cascading over her shoulders and a blouse that clung to every curve. She was radiant, self-assured, the kind of woman who turned heads without even trying. And Richard, he was looking at her the way he hadn't looked at me in years. His hand rested casually on her hip, his lips brushing close to her ear as he whispered something that made her laugh. And that word, darling, it hadn't been meant for me at all. The air seemed to thin. My chest tightened as though the floor had given way beneath me. I wanted to storm out, to scream, to demand an explanation, but my legs carried me forward instead, following them like a ghost. They walked into a bridal boutique, the glitter of white gowns filling the window display. A bridal boutique. I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. This couldn't be real. It had to be some misunderstanding, some cruel joke. Yet there was no laughter, no hidden camera crew waiting to jump out and reveal it was all staged. I slipped inside behind them, hiding between a row of tuxedos, my fingers gripping the fabric as if it could anchor me to the ground. "Something elegant," Richard said confidently, patting the woman's side as though she were already his. "The most beautiful gown you have. She deserves nothing less." The sales associate smiled and hurried off to fetch dresses. The blonde, Amanda, I would soon learn, pouted playfully, brushing her manicured nails along Richard's chest. "You're making me blush," she teased. "Not nearly enough," he whispered, his voice dripping with the kind of affection he never spared me anymore. I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood, straining to hear every word. "When will you finally divorce that wife of yours?" Amanda asked, lowering her voice, but not enough to escape me. "I'm tired of waiting, Richard." My blood ran cold. "Soon," he assured her, squeezing her hand. "As soon as I push her to sign the papers. She'll transfer the house, the company, everything. She has no idea what's coming. A little more pressure and she'll give in. Trust me." Amanda giggled, leaning into him. "And then we'll have our wedding next month." "Of course," Richard promised, his tone steady, certain. "By then, she'll be out of the picture. Permanently." I staggered back against the shelf, my breath catching in my throat. The dresses around me blurred, ivory and lace swimming in my vision. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just betrayal. He was planning to erase me, to strip me of everything, my home, my inheritance, even the company my parents had entrusted to me. The man I had once trusted with my heart was preparing to destroy me. And in that moment, hidden among gowns meant for new beginnings, I realized that my marriage was already over. Richard had made his choice, and if I didn't act carefully, if I didn't protect myself, I would lose not only him, but everything I had left. By the time I left the mall, the world felt blurred around me. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I drove toward Katie's school. I needed to gather myself before seeing her, but no amount of deep breaths could erase the sound of Richard's voice promising another woman a wedding. When I pulled up, Katie spotted me through the glass doors and came running. Well, as close to running as she could. My little girl's gait was uneven, one leg slightly shorter than the other. She stumbled, then steadied herself, her pigtails bouncing. "Mommy!" she squealed, flinging her arms around me. I knelt and hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of crayons and childhood that clung to her sweater. For a moment, the horror of what I'd witnessed earlier faded. Katie was my anchor. She always had been. "Mommy, Matthew teased me again today," she said as we walked to the car. Her voice was matter of fact, but I heard the crack in it. He said I walk funny. Everyone laughed. I forced a smile, though my chest burned. "Sweetheart, you are perfect exactly the way you are. Don't let silly words make you forget that." She nodded, but her eyes dropped to the pavement. She was only 6. How could she understand the cruelty of children, or the cruelty of her own father? The memory stabbed me without warning. Richard standing in her living room, glaring down at me months ago. Katie had just tripped while carrying her doll, and his face twisted with disgust. "She's crippled, Natalie," he snapped. "Do you realize what people think when they see her? This is your fault. My family doesn't have defects. This came from you." I had stood frozen, clutching Katie against me, my throat burning. "She is not crippled," I whispered. "She's strong. She's smart. She's ours." But Richard only sneered. "She'll never be normal. You gave me a flawed child." Even now, the echo of his words made my stomach churn. I shook it away and helped Katie climb into her booster seat. "You're beautiful," I told her softly. "Stronger than anyone I know." As I closed the car door, a voice behind me startled me. "Excuse me, Mrs. Whitaker," he said, using my married name, one I still wasn't used to hearing out loud. I turned to see a tall man in a tailored suit walking toward us, holding the hand of a small boy. Recognition hit instantly. The boy was Matthew, Katie's classmate and tormentor. "Mr. Hayes," I said cautiously. He offered a rueful smile. "Daniel, please. I wanted to apologize for my son. I heard about today. Matthew," he glanced down at the boy, who shuffled uncomfortably, "has been unkind, and I'm truly sorry." Katie sat watching from the car window, her eyes wide. Matthew muttered something I couldn't hear. Daniel crouched beside him. "Go on," he urged gently. "I'm sorry, Katie," Matthew mumbled, not quite looking at her. "I won't tease you again." Katie's lips pursed, but after a pause she nodded with a tiny, queenly air. "Fine, but only if it's the last time." Daniel chuckled softly, relief flickering across his face. I found myself smiling despite everything. "She has spirit," he said, straightening. "You should be proud." "I am," I replied, and then, unexpectedly, we lingered. He asked about Katie, about how long she'd been walking that way. I hesitated. This was private, vulnerable, but something about his steady gray eyes invited trust. "I'm a divorce attorney," he said when I asked about his work. "I see families at their worst, but also at their turning points. And I happen to have a close friend who's a pediatric orthopedic surgeon in San Diego. He specializes in cases like your daughter's. He's the best I know." My breath caught. "Really?" Daniel nodded. "I could connect you. He's changed lives. Katie could have a different future." For the first time that day, a spark of hope flickered in me. Amid betrayal and despair, here was a stranger offering a possibility I had almost given up on. I looked at Katie through the car window, her small frame, her brave smile, and silently promised her that I would find a way. The night of the party arrived, and the Whitaker mansion gleamed like something out of a glossy magazine. Chandeliers spilled golden light across marble floors. Laughter echoed against the vaulted ceilings, and every corner was filled with people in glittering gowns and tailored suits. It should have felt like a celebration, but to me it was nothing more than a stage for Richard's arrogance. He made it clear that Katie was not welcome. "She'll only embarrass me," he had said earlier, his voice cold and final. "The guests don't need to see a little girl stumbling around. She stays upstairs." I swallowed my fury for the sake of peace, but inside my chest burned. As the evening wore on, I stood by Richard's side, smiling at people I hardly knew while they pretended to care. "Oh, Natalie, you look radiant," one woman gushed, her diamond necklace catching the light. Her eyes, however, slid past me almost instantly to Richard, the one she truly wanted to impress. I forced a polite nod. Another man clinked his glass against mine, congratulating Richard on his success, as if the party was about him alone. Every word felt like another brick laid on top of me, pressing me down. My cheeks ached from smiling, and my stomach churned with exhaustion. Then, like a storm cloud tearing across a sunny sky, Amanda appeared. I froze when I saw her step into the ballroom, draped in a crimson dress that turned heads instantly. Gasps rippled through the guests. She moved with calculated grace, her lips curved in a knowing smirk. She shouldn't have been here, and yet there she was, an uninvited guest in Richard's kingdom. My heart hammered as she approached, her eyes locking onto mine. "Natalie," she said sweetly, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "Still playing the perfect wife." Her words sliced through the air, daring me to react. Richard's hand tightened on my arm, his smile plastered in place for the crowd. "Ignore her," he whispered through gritted teeth. But Amanda had already stirred the whispers, and people watched us with barely disguised curiosity. My throat dried, but I refused to let her see me break. I turned away, pretending she was nothing more than a shadow, though the rage, simmering in me, threatened to spill over. Then Richard made his move. With a clap of his hands, he called for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming across the hall, "I have a special surprise for you tonight." My blood ran cold when I saw the nanny leading Katie toward the staircase. She was dressed in a frilly dress she hated, her small hands clutching the banister. Richard's eyes gleamed with pride as he gestured toward her. "My daughter will now perform a little dance for you all." The guests clapped politely, oblivious to the cruelty of it. Katie's face was pale, her lip trembling as she glanced at me for rescue. Something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, my voice sharp and clear. "No, she will not." The room fell silent, every eye darting between me and Richard. "She is not a toy for your amusement, Richard. She's a child, our child, and you will not humiliate her like this." The tension cracked through the air like lightning. Richard's smile never faltered, but his eyes turned icy. "Natalie, sweetheart," he said in a voice dripping with condescension, "I think the champagne has gone to your head. You're clearly not yourself." He chuckled softly, inviting others to laugh with him. "Please forgive my wife. She tends to get emotional." Laughter bubbled from the crowd, hesitant at first, then stronger, as if they feared offending their host by not joining in. I felt heat flood my cheeks, humiliation clawing at my skin. But worse than the mockery was the realization that Richard had already prepared for this. From the corner of my eye, I saw his phone angled discreetly, recording everything. He wanted evidence, proof that I was unstable, irrational, unfit. Proof he could use to rip Katie away from me. I stood frozen, torn between anger and despair, while the party swirled around me in a haze of clinking glasses and forced laughter. Richard had turned my resistance into a spectacle, and in that moment I knew the battle lines had been drawn. After the last guest left and the house fell into silence, I thought I could finally breathe. The clinking glasses, the fake smiles, the careful choreography of the evening. It was over. But Richard wasn't done. He poured himself another drink, his tie loosened, his eyes glassy yet sharp in a way that made my stomach knot. "You played your role well tonight," he said flatly, dropping onto the leather armchair. "But don't think for a second that means you've won." I stayed near the doorway, still in the emerald dress that felt less like armor now and more like a trap. "Richard, can we not do this tonight?" My voice was tired, pleading. He swirled the whiskey, smirking. "Oh, we'll do this tonight, because from tomorrow things change. You're going to sign the transfer papers for the company and the house. Everything. To me." He leaned forward, his smile curdling into menace. "Otherwise, you'll lose Katie." The sound of my daughter's name on his lips jolted me awake. "What are you talking about? She's my child." "Our child," he corrected, raising a finger. "And I'll prove in court that you're unfit. You want to know how? Easy. All those clips from last year. The one where you passed out on the couch with a glass of wine still in your hand. The time you broke down crying after a board meeting, screaming at me to get out. Imagine how a judge will see that. A mother who's unstable. A mother who drinks too much. A mother who can't be trusted with a child." His words landed like blows. I could picture him in a courtroom, parading every weakness, twisting every moment of exhaustion into a weapon. "You wouldn't dare!" I whispered, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. "Oh, I would," he said coolly, "because it's not about Katie. I don't give a damn about her bedtime stories or her little drawings. She's just leverage. The perfect way to make sure you don't fight me." My knees weakened, and I gripped the edge of the wall to stay standing. He didn't want custody for love. He wanted it to hurt me, to cut me where it would bleed the most. "I built this company with you," I said, my voice cracking. "And the house. We built this life together." "And now you'll hand it over," he shot back, "or Katie disappears from your world. You think the courts care about your sob stories? They'll listen to the evidence, and I'll make sure they see you exactly how I want." I stared at him, unable to recognize the man I had once trusted, the man I had once loved. The air between us thickened, and for the first time, I felt something stronger than fear, revulsion. Hours later, the house was quiet again. Richard had staggered upstairs, satisfied with his threats. I sat in the darkened living room, the echo of his words replaying in my head, each one more poisonous than the last. My hands trembled, but my mind sharpened in a way it hadn't in years. If I stayed, I would lose everything, my daughter, my dignity, my very sense of self. He had already written the script. I'd sign, I'd bow, I'd disappear. But he underestimated me. I looked toward Katie's room, where the soft glow of her nightlight painted the doorframe. She was the only thing that mattered. Her laughter, her warmth, her small hand in mine. That was what I needed to protect. And if Richard thought I would let him use her as a pawn, he didn't know me anymore. In that silence, I made my decision. I would not surrender. I would not sign. And I would not allow him to tear Katie from me. That night, while Richard slept, I began to plan. Not a scream, not a fight, not another plea. He would expect those. No, this had to be quiet, careful, and deliberate. I traced out the pieces in my mind. Where we would go, who I could trust, how to keep both Katie and myself safe while making sure he could never take everything we had built. The fear was still there, humming under my skin, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it fueled me. By morning, I would have a plan. And for the first time in years, Richard wouldn't be the only one pulling the strings. That morning, long before the first light of dawn stretched across the curtains, I lay in bed listening to the steady breath of Richard beside me. My heart pounded against my ribs, so hard I was afraid he would hear it. I knew this was the day. There would never be a better moment, no safer opening. If I waited, he would tighten his grip. If I delayed, he would find another way to break me. And Katie would grow up believing fear was love. When the alarm on his phone buzzed, Richard stirred and muttered something about a meeting in the city. I forced a sleepy smile, kissed his cheek, and pretended to roll back under the blanket. Only when I heard the front door shut and the engine of his car fade into the distance did I finally move. I slipped into his office, the air thick with the smell of his cologne lingering on the leather chair. My hands trembled as I crouched before the steel safe. He thought I never paid attention, but I had memorized the code months ago. For digits he used for everything, his mother's birthday. My fingers hesitated above the dial for one sharp breath. Then I entered the numbers. The lock clicked open. Bundles of cash sat inside, neat and smug, like trophies of his control. I scooped them out, stuffing them into a canvas bag until the weight bent my shoulder. Then I took the documents I had prepared over the past week, Katie's birth certificate, my passport, the file of medical papers from her pediatrician. Each page felt like proof of our right to exist beyond Richard's shadow. I packed light, just one suitcase with clothes for us both, hidden beneath old blankets in the trunk of my car. By the time I zipped it shut, the morning sun was lifting over the rooftops, painting everything in gold. A cruel contrast to the storm twisting inside me. "Mommy, why are we up so early?" Katie whispered, rubbing her eyes as she padded into the kitchen. I crouched and smoothed her hair. "It's a special day, sweetheart. We're going to do something very brave." I dressed her in her school uniform, handed her the backpack as if it were an ordinary morning, and drove her to school. Every turn of the wheel felt like walking a tightrope above a chasm. When we pulled up in front of the gates, Katie leaned over and kissed my cheek. "See you later, Mommy." Her words stabbed deep. I swallowed hard, watching her small figure disappear into the sea of children. Half an hour later, my phone rang. Richard. His voice was sharp, already suspicious. "Where are you? Why didn't you answer earlier?" I forced a calm tone. "I'm dropping Katie off at school." "See? She's fine." I snapped a quick photo of the schoolyard and sent it to him. He grunted something about calling later and hung up. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. He believed me for now. That gave me a narrow window. I circled back, parked in a side street, and slipped into the school office with a fabricated excuse about a doctor's appointment. Minutes later, Katie was in my arms again, confusion flickering in her eyes. "We're going on a trip, baby," I whispered, carrying her toward the car. "Just you and me." As I crossed the lot, fate intervened. Daniel's car pulled up at the curb. He stepped out, surprise etched across his face when he saw me clutching Katie, the suitcase dragging at my side. "Natalie." His eyes darted from me to the bag, then to my pale face. "What's going on? You look like you're running for your life." I froze, every instinct screaming not to trust anyone. But there was something in his voice, steady, warm, unjudging, that broke through the panic. My lips parted, but no words came. Instead, my eyes filled. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you need help, let me. Please." Katie buried her face against my shoulder, and I knew I couldn't do this alone. I nodded almost imperceptibly. Daniel opened the passenger door, and I climbed in with Katie. As the door slammed shut and the engine roared to life, a strange clarity washed over me. The road stretched out ahead, unknown and terrifying, but for the first time in years, it was ours. We were no longer Richard's prisoners. We were fugitives of his control, bound for a freedom I could barely imagine. And with Daniel's steady hands on the wheel, our escape had begun. The salt-tinged air of San Diego hit me the moment we stepped out of the car. After months of gray skies and suffocating tension in Seattle, the California coast felt like a different world altogether. Daniel had insisted we come here. He said Katie needed more than hope. She needed a real chance, and his closest friend, Dr. Alvarez, was one of the best pediatric orthopedic surgeons in the country. Daniel booked us on the earliest flight he could find. Within hours, we were on our way to San Diego. After a few days of preoperative evaluations and physical assessments, Katie was finally scheduled for surgery. Standing by the ocean that first evening, watching the waves roll in, I almost dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, we had turned a corner. Katie clung to my hand as we walked into the hospital the next morning, her small frame dwarfed by the sterile hallways. She tried to be brave, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel stayed close, carrying her backpack, cracking little jokes just loud enough to make her giggle. For the first time in months, she wasn't staring at the floor. She looked up, and in that simple tilt of her chin, I saw courage I hadn't known a child could carry. The surgery lasted hours. I sat in the waiting room with Daniel by my side, my fingers twisted together, so tightly they hurt. Every time a nurse passed, my heart skipped. Daniel never once left me. He brought me water, reminded me to breathe, and when I couldn't stop shaking, he quietly wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "She's strong, Natalie," he whispered, "and she's not alone. Neither are you." Those words anchored me when I thought I would fall apart. When Dr. Alvarez finally appeared, exhaustion written across his face, but his eyes steady, I knew before he spoke. "It went well," he said, and the world crashed back into color. Relief overwhelmed me so hard I had to sit down. Katie would walk again. Not right away, not without pain, but she would. The weeks that followed were grueling. Physical therapy was a battlefield. Tears, frustration, moments when Katie screamed she couldn't do it anymore. But then there were days she stood for a few seconds longer or took a shaky step without help. I watched her fight for every inch of progress, and I realized she wasn't just healing, she was teaching me what resilience truly looked like. Every evening after therapy, Daniel drove us to the beach. We would sit on the sand as the sun dropped into the horizon, Katie leaning against me, Daniel skipping stones across the tide. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. The silence wasn't empty. It was steady, full of unspoken understanding. He became more than a friend. He became a constant, someone who believed in me when I had forgotten how to believe in myself. One night, Katie managed to walk from the blanket to the shoreline, her steps awkward but determined. The sea breeze lifted her hair as she spread her arms wide, laughing through her tears. Daniel clapped, his grin stretching wide, and I cried without shame, because in that moment I saw the future again. Not the broken one Richard had left us with, but something new, something whole. Meanwhile, back in Seattle, Richard unraveled. I heard through acquaintances that he had stormed into my old neighborhood, demanding to know where I'd gone. He called, left messages that shifted from rage to begging, but I never answered. Amanda, once so smug in her alliance with him, disappeared as soon as she realized he had no claim to the fortune he thought he'd inherit. Without money, without control, he was nothing to her. By the time Katie walked across the sand unassisted for the first time, Richard's voice had become nothing more than static on a distant line. The ocean roared beside us, endless and alive, and I let it carry away every ounce of fear. We were healing, not just Katie's legs, but our hearts, too. And Daniel was there, steady as the tide, showing me that sometimes family isn't just what you're born into, but what you choose to build. The courthouse in downtown Seattle felt colder than I expected, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the weight pressing down on me as I walked in, flanked by Daniel on one side and my sister on the other. I had spent years inside the walls of the home Richard and I built, believing it was indestructible. Now, those years had brought me to this moment, a moment where everything would be decided not in whispers behind closed doors, but in front of a judge, under oath with evidence and truth laid bare. Daniel had agreed to represent me. He wasn't just my attorney. By now, he had become a steady presence, someone who believed in me when I barely believed in myself. "Stay calm," he whispered as we entered the courtroom. "The evidence is on our side. Today, he can't hide behind charm or lies. Today, it's only facts." Richard sat across the aisle, perfectly tailored in his dark suit, his hair slicked back as though presentation alone might sway the judge. But behind that polished exterior, I could see the tremor in his jaw, the stiffness in the way he adjusted his cufflinks. He knew this wasn't his arena. He couldn't bully or manipulate a courtroom. The trial began with Richard's attorney confidently stepping forward. Their strategy was clear: discredit me, frame me as unstable and unfit. And their weapon? The infamous video from my birthday party, the one Richard had orchestrated, hoping to catch me looking drunk and unhinged in front of his colleagues. The clip was played on the large screen, filling the silent courtroom with shaky images of me raising a glass. Gasps echoed faintly from the benches, as if this one moment could decide everything. Richard leaned back in his chair, lips curling in smug satisfaction. But Daniel was ready. He rose calmly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Your Honor, we acknowledge this video shows my client holding a glass. But what it does not show, what it cannot prove, is that she consumed alcohol. In fact, we have medical evidence that proves the opposite." He handed over a full video recording, taken by a guest from a different angle, clearly showing my client never drank from the glass. In addition, we have a signed statement from the catering manager confirming that she only requested non-alcoholic beverages throughout the evening. "This video was not evidence of misconduct," Daniel continued, "but evidence of my client's husband's attempt to frame her." "This video was manipulated to create an illusion," Daniel continued. It is not evidence of misconduct, but evidence of my client's husband's attempt to frame her. The judge studied the documents, then looked at me. Mrs. Whitaker, can you confirm under oath that you did not consume alcohol that evening? My voice was steady. Yes, Your Honor. I never drank. My husband pressured me to hold the glass. He wanted this footage to damage me. Richard's lawyer tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand. The test results speak for themselves. This evidence is inadmissible. I caught the flicker of panic in Richard's eyes. For the first time, he realized the fortress he had built of lies was crumbling. From there, the momentum shifted. Daniel laid out the financial records, showing Richard's reckless spending, his secret withdrawals from our accounts, his failed business ventures. Witnesses confirmed his repeated absences from home, his neglect as a father. Piece by piece, Daniel painted a picture not of a devoted husband, but of a man who had systematically tried to dismantle the life we shared. The verdict, when it came, was almost surreal. The court grants full custody of the minor child to Mrs. Whitaker. She will retain ownership of the marital home and the family business. Mr. Whitaker's claims are denied. The gavel struck, final and echoing. It was over. Richard's face drained of color. He sat frozen as the reality settled in. His reputation shattered, his career prospects gone, his grasp on power extinguished. Everything he had schemed for slipped through his fingers in a single ruling. As for me, I felt no triumph, only release. It wasn't about winning. It was about finally being free from his control, his cruelty, his endless games. I reached for Daniel's hand, and for the first time in years, breathed without fear. The courtroom emptied, footsteps fading into the marble hall. Richard stayed behind, slumped in his chair, a man undone by his own ambition. I didn't look back. My future was waiting outside those doors, brighter than anything he could ever take from me. The first real snow of the season had already melted when Katie ran across the park lawn with her arms stretched wide, her laughter ringing like silver bells. Months of grueling treatment, endless nights of worry, and the sharp smell of antiseptic had finally given way to freedom. I stood at the edge of the path, watching her race the wind, my heart swelling at the sight of her ponytail whipping behind her. The doctors had called her recovery remarkable, but I knew it wasn't a miracle. It was the result of her courage and every ounce of fight inside her small body. I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, knowing we had been given a second chance. Seattle's skyline greeted me with its familiar glass towers and restless energy when I returned a few weeks later. The city hadn't changed, but I had. I walked into the headquarters of my company, no longer the fragile woman who once hid behind Richard's shadow, but someone stronger, forged by betrayal and tempered by survival. The boardroom where I once felt outnumbered now felt like mine. I took my seat at the head of the table, fingers grazing the polished wood, and met the eyes of each executive without flinching. Their silence told me everything. They had expected a woman broken, but what they saw was a leader reborn. Richard's name had all but vanished from conversations in the office. His downfall had been swift once the truth of his schemes unraveled. Investors turned their backs, friends drifted away, and he was left clinging to scraps of a reputation that no one cared to salvage. I heard whispers of him living in a rented apartment on the edge of town, alone, bitter, watching from the outside as the empire he once tried to control slipped forever beyond his reach. Strangely, I felt no satisfaction in his ruin. Betrayal had already stolen too much of me. Vengeance would only chain me to the same misery. Katie tugged on my coat one evening as we walked past the harbor, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Do you think Daniel will come to dinner again soon?" she asked, her voice hesitant, as though afraid the hope in her chest was too fragile to voice. I smiled, tightening my arm around her shoulders. "I think he might," I replied softly. Daniel had been there through the darkest nights, steady and patient, never asking for more than I was able to give. Slowly, without forcing it, He had become part of our rhythm, driving us home from the hospital, bringing meals when exhaustion stole my strength, making Katie laugh when fear still lingered in her eyes. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't burdened by regret or fear. I could picture evenings filled with simple warmth. Katie's homework spread across the table, Daniel reading by the fire, and laughter that belonged to a home, not just a house. I wasn't ready to name it love, not yet, but I was ready to open the door to the possibility of something real, something lasting, something honest. As the city lights flickered across the water, I breathed deeply of the cool air and felt the weight that had pressed on my chest for so long finally lift. Betrayal had once threatened to destroy me, but it had also stripped away illusions, leaving behind only truth. And in truth, there was freedom. Life doesn't always return what is stolen, but sometimes it offers something better, a chance to begin again. And standing there with Katie's hand in mine, her laughter echoing into the night, I realized that a new beginning wasn't just possible. It had already begun.